Max and Steve. Thanks for making the time again. We actually started within 2 minutes of our intended live stream time, so congrats to getting all your equipment on. We've got a ton of things we could talk about, and I've got listed in the title Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, Anchorwatch and Thorchain, both because I thought they would be kind of interesting, maybe somewhat spicy topics, and relevant and timely in their own way. So I don't know, those are some initial ideas. Feel free to add stuff if you have stuff you want. I'll tell you, like, for me, I have been glued to this LA fire stuff. I don't know if you guys are following the story closely or just aware of it.
Certainly aware of it. Reaching out to a bunch of folks that I'm close to down there, making sure they're okay.
Yeah. I think there's. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I've been trying increasingly in the new year to stay more and more off of just like following stuff on Twitter, which is interesting because I know that's also interesting how we build a list. I'm increasingly just following more and more on Stacker News because I find that is for me at least, much higher signal. Like I don't scroll and waste a lot of time on there. However, I have heard through the grapevine there's a couple of threads in Stacker News around the fires, and I mean the things that stand out to me. One, have we ever had a wildfire in January before? Not that I know of.
I don't know of it.
Yeah, so that's pretty scary. I mean, definitely seems like the world is changing in many different dimensions at once. And then two, obviously, just the fact that the response has been non-existent is pretty, I don't know, pretty scary about what would happen in a world where things, extreme weather events and other kinds of disasters are more common. So I think people are starting to question, maybe have more of a COVID type wake-up moment. Are we really protected or not?
Yep. I do think it is going to be a COVID moment, hopefully for at least the state, if not the whole country, to sort of realize that a lot of the assumptions that people make about who's protecting them and who's saving what is actually maybe a little more theater, and that like when things get tested by actual fire burning, you actually are called into question, like, what is the truth here? So, my heart goes out to the people who have lost a lot, but I also take an optimistic view that maybe this can help people wake up and cause some change, for us. And it actually dovetails nicely, I think, into one of these topics. I forget if I tweeted it or not, but I was basically saying, like, this is like, probably the biggest boating accident we've seen. And I guess that kind of is a little bit of a transition into the Anchorwatch stuff, maybe, because, effectively, and what I mean by that, just to explain the boating accident thing, is there's a lot of people who may have had self-custody with keys in a home, maybe a fireproof safe, and maybe that actually wasn't able to survive because the destruction looked really serious. But like, what are the alternatives to custody? I think we're going to talk about next week, kind of a whole survey that we've been working on, that Steve's been pioneering here. But then this Anchorwatch thing just came up this week. I think the company has been around for a while. It's got some sort of a new approach to both the custody and the insurance of that custody. And I've only read the headlines, and I got to say, I don't really understand it. But I know Steve has done a deep dive, so we'll turn it over to the professor to learn a little bit about Anchorwatch.
Yeah, I've done a little more homework than you. I think I can describe it, but I wouldn't call myself an expert on it yet. So maybe Rob is listening, the founder, and he can correct things. But
and before we let you get started, we should. You've reminded us, Steve, to solicit. It's a live show. It's purposely that way so we can get feedback. So ask us questions in the chat. Rob, if you're here, raise your hand. Maybe we can get you on. Maybe we don't. I don't know. But yeah, feel free to chime in the chat and let us know topics you're interested in hearing about, further probing questions that you have on everything you're hearing here. So we're doing it live.
Okay. Oh, it looks so. I just learned. I think all three of us learned last week that we have not only a live chat audience in Riverside, but also on X. And I just checked X.
I didn't know.
And Rob did post.
Oh, wow.
With the Anchorwatch rocket ship. So
wow.
He heard us.
Shout out to Rob. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Anchorwatch. He can grade me on how well I do describing it. But I mean, let me just start by saying I think custody solutions for Bitcoin it's just one of the that and mining are the two most interesting aspects of Bitcoin for me, I think. I believe self-custody in Bitcoin is essential to Bitcoin's long-term success and long-term value. And by that, I mean, I don't think every person has to self-custody, but I think some material amount of people need to self-custody, and everyone needs to have a credible option to self-custody when they need to. And by credible option, meaning like it's a user experience that they can realistically use. It's relatively safe for them, and it's available to them. So I think that's really, really important to any kind of long-term value of Bitcoin. So even if you're in Bitcoin only for number goes up and just getting rich or whatever, God bless you, but you should still care about self-custody, even if you don't self-custody. So anytime there's like a new novel approach to, well, actually another framing of this is like self-custody is very hard. It is putting the power into the hands of the people, and that power is a number, your private key, and it's very sensitive information. It's this like weird conundrum between availability and security. So like you want it to be available to you. You don't want to lose it. If you lose it, literally the money is gone. There's no 1-800 number. If you make it too available, it gets easier to steal. And you don't want people stealing it, because if people steal it, you can't get it back. It's irreversible. So often solutions have to trade off. Like, do we make it more available or do we make it more secure? So it's a really, really hard problem. For the past 10 plus years within the Bitcoin space, it's improved every single year. Like there's the advent of the hardware wallet, and there's just been like numerous technological advances that keep improving the security and the user experience, but it still is really, really hard. Lots of foot guns, really easy to lose your coins. And so I just get excited anytime there's a new novel approach. We've talked a little bit about BitKey. We'll talk about BitKey more, because I do know that product super well. Love their approach. But today we're going to talk about Anchorwatch, which admittedly, I've known about Anchorwatch at a high level for 2 or 3 years, largely because they're using BDK, the Bitcoin Development Kit, which is a project that my organization helps fund and help start. So I'm just like, proud of that project being used in the space. But not until Anchorwatch launched this past week, did I actually look at the details of what their service is and how it works. And I really become enamored with it. I really like their approach. So let's talk about it. So what is Anchorwatch? So it is a custody solution for people. It's collaborative custody. So it does provide for self custody, but they also have like collaborative assistance themselves.
And it's designed to serve like an end user use case, like just an individual, not kind of a corporate or balance sheet type.
I guess we'd have to ask Rob or the team to know exactly who they're going after. It seems to me like they're going after relatively large Bitcoin balances. So whether that is a wealthy individual, or it could be an organization too, I think. At least architecturally, that's what would make sense to me. So I think either group, if it's a small amount of Bitcoin, it's probably overkill. But if it's medium to large amount of Bitcoin, or even a very large amount, then it could make a lot of sense. So how does it work? Well, the most simple form of custody is a single key. So there's a private key, and if you have that private key, that gives you the authority to spend the Bitcoin. And it's referred to as single sig or single signature, because there's only one key, so you only need to provide one signature, a cryptographic signature, to spend that money. Multi-sig has become relatively popular, and that can come in many forms, like 2 of 3, for example, where there's 3 keys and 2 of them are needed to produce signatures to spend the Bitcoin. It's definitely more secure than single signature, in the sense that you don't have a single point of failure. So if one of your keys gets stolen, the thief still cannot spend your money. They have to steal 2 keys. So as long as your keys are physically separated or have different protections against them, maybe a different software stack, different hardware, if there's diversity in how those keys are protected, you are more protected. Anchorwatch takes that to the next level. They have, and actually their architecture is similar to what a lot of exchanges like a Coinbase might do. Very sophisticated. and yet Anchorwatch has simplified it for an individual to actually use it. So with Anchorwatch, you have the customer has a 2 of 3 wallet, but Anchorwatch also has a set of keys, like a 2 of 3. And they also
when you say
layer.
the user has like 2 of 3, meaning the user has, like, say 2 hardware wallets or 2 seed phrases that they're holding out of 3 required, or out of 3 that are available. So two would need to be available to spend.
Right. And I don't know which products Anchorwatch supports, but it's probably similar to Unchained or Casa, where they support Trezor and Ledger and Cold Card and things like that. I'm sure they probably support like a subset, and they'll just keep adding more support later on. But
it's kind of unique. You're saying if the end user has 2 of 3 and Anchorwatch has 2 of 3 for that same spend. Is that right?
That part. So there's several novel things. I'm not aware of any other solution that's available to consumers, at least. Again, large custodians like a Coinbase have elaborate systems like this, but in terms of what's available to like anyone in our audience or us, I think it's novel. So point number one that's novel: the customer has a 2 of 3 and Anchorwatch has a 2 of 3.
Wait, Steve,
those are then composed.
Are those for the same?
Yeah. So let me answer that. So those are composed into like a 2 of 2. So ultimately, to spend the Bitcoin, both Anchorwatch and the customer have to satisfy their respective 2 of 3 quorums. Those are then composed into a 2 of 2, which is used to spend. So what does that mean? That means Anchorwatch can't unilaterally spend the money or steal it, because the customer has to participate too. However, it does mean that Anchorwatch could freeze spending, because they are required to participate to spend. So if that was the end of the solution, then it would be interesting, but not super interesting. How does this become self-sovereign? How does the customer break free of Anchorwatch if they're not cooperating? The other novel cool thing about Anchorwatch is that they've layered in time locks. And so for those in the audience that aren't familiar with this, part of Bitcoin consensus is the ability to lock up your Bitcoin for a period of time. So like if David sends me Bitcoin, the most simple transaction, I'd receive it and I can immediately spend it again. But I can set it up so that the Bitcoin that I receive has a time component as well, in which I can't spend it for a certain amount of wall clock time or a certain number of Bitcoin blocks. So that could be like, an hour, a week, it could be a year. Yeah, you can do either.
How does it resolve wall clock time? Is that, you're saying Anchorwatch enables that? Bitcoin itself doesn't know anything about wall clock time, does it?
Bitcoin itself does. Yep. I think it's BIP 113 or 117 or 119, in that range.
You're saying that Bitcoin knows the wall clock time?
Yeah, it's magical, right? Here,
tell me about this. I didn't know that. Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit of a tangent, but it is related to this. So when a block is mined by a miner, it includes a timestamp, which the miner inserts. And, it's supposed to be like whatever the Linux time is, or the NNTP time, or whatever the time the computer says, that's what gets inserted. And that's probably what's inserted most of the time. Now, if you put your adversarial minded hat on, then you can fudge, or first of all, that number could just be, it could be the wrong time. Or it could be malicious. You could make up any time you want. You could say it's like the year 2300 or, BC or whatever. So I think, David, that's why you're like kind of wondering, how does Bitcoin know time because of that? Well, the BIP I was referring to, 113, 119, something like that. I think it's 113. It looks at the past like 12 blocks, and it requires that the timestamp in like the 12th block or the 13th block or something like that has to be within a certain range, based on what was the information contained in the last 12 or so, and that's how there's like a sense of time in Bitcoin.
And then does that time can be used with like time lock scripts for spending scripts?
Yeah, I'd want to go brush up and like to be definitive on this, but I believe that is the case. Yeah.
But the more traditional way would be to, if you wanted to say spend at a certain time, my understanding would be the traditional way would be pick a block height, which is kind of the native Bitcoin concept of time, and say that this can't be spent until a certain block height, right?
Yeah, I don't know how it breaks down in terms of, percentage usage, but I mean, I'll study up on this, come back with definitive answers, but it's kind of like doesn't really matter in the set. I mean, the high level point is that you can specify a certain amount of time, however it's measured, before the Bitcoin can be spent. And how does it play into the Anchorwatch solution? It's because Anchorwatch attaches multiple spending conditions to that Bitcoin. The first one, I think they call it layers. Like layer 1 is what I already mentioned. Like the customer has 2 of 3 keys that they need to contribute. Anchorwatch has 2 of 3. If they both do that, and then they can spend the Bitcoin. But the second layer is after some period of time, or there's 4 layers. I'm remembering 2 of the others. It'll get the general point of cost. At some point, like maybe 6 months later, all of a sudden you only need as the customer, you only need 1 of your 3 keys. And that helps with resiliency in terms of loss. If you somehow lost 2 of your 3 keys, you're still not screwed because you only need 1 of 3 at that point. But there's a trade-off with 1 of 3. I mean, the reason why it's not 1 of 3 at layer 1 is because it's not as secure. Again, it gets back to this fundamental trade-off between availability and security. Because if you had 1 of 3 out of the gate, then a thief only needs to steal 1 of your keys and they could steal the coins. But here's a situation where if you do happen to lose 2 of your 3 keys, so you only have 1, and you would normally be screwed with a traditional 2 of 3 wallet, now you just have to wait something like 6 months, some period of time, and then you can escape out of that and sort of reset, start over. And then I'm forgetting one of their layers, but then the final layer is you completely detach from Anchorwatch so that you don't depend on them anymore. Now, so like if Anchorwatch is no longer trustworthy, or the feds have told them don't service this customer or whatever, then the customer just has to wait like a year and then they break free of that. Sorry, Max, you're gonna.
How does that condition work where you can use 1 signature after a certain amount of time? Do you set that amount of time up front and then you have to continuously like remessage or notify that you don't want to activate it or that you do want to activate it? How does one activate? I want to be able to withdraw with 1 key in 6 months.
It's that time is set locked in up front. So when you first create a wallet in the service, that's locked in, and then you do need to reset it. I did ask Rob this to understand how frequently these have to be reset, and he said it's once a year. And by reset, that means doing an on-chain transaction on the Bitcoin protocol to reset all these timers, basically.
So in theory, once every 1 year or whatever your condition is, you need to access your key that you have, work collaboratively with Anchorwatch or the third key. And who has the third key, by the way? Is that you as well?
Well, which third key? So you as the customer have 3 keys,
mm-hmm.
and then Anchorwatch has 3 keys.
Oh, got it. So okay, I understand now. So and then you combine those into a 2 and 2. But of those 3 keys that I as the customer hold, I can do whatever I want. So Anchorwatch is not suggesting, for example, there's like some Swiss, company or something that holds 1 of those keys.
Yeah, I actually didn't see or read the details on that, so it's only speculation. But I suspect you as the customer have complete control over what you do, where you physically hold those 3 keys.
Right.
Again, they might only support certain products, but
cool. Why?
But
so I
think
it's
within your control. And then I know that there's real quick. Sorry, Max, but there's another, I think the other layer, I think there's like another third party that's independent from Anchorwatch who also has a set of keys, which kicks in at one of those later time lock layers. So if like Anchorwatch disappears or goes down or loses their keys or whatever, then you've got like even have another backup third party. So there's just like layers of redundancy here. And it's just a really nice balance of safety and self-sovereignty. Like if things go bad and all those third parties like work against you, you're not screwed. You just have to, you know, the only trade-off is you have to wait like a year or something like that. But at least you're not completely hosed. And yet you have all these layers of backups and redundancy. So the odds of losing your coins are very low. And let me, before we hear more of your thoughts, and also I see Rob's sent many messages, so we'll read through that to see what we can correct. But another really important part of the service, and maybe he would say the most important part, is that it has insurance, Lloyd's of London insurance. And this is very novel. I believe it's the first product that has full insurance. Like sometimes exchanges will say they have insurance, but all that really means is that their hot wallet is insured. And their hot wallet typically only has like 2% of the coins, or, you know, a very small percentage of the coins they hold. So somehow their cold storage is hacked and stolen from, the insurance doesn't cover that. Also, often with exchanges, the insurance covers the exchange, but not any individual customer. So like if somehow, you know, as an individual, your coins are lost, that doesn't cover you. Here, my understanding is it's a, you know, fully insured. And, you know, I don't know the exact T's and C's. I'd want to understand that, like exactly what has to occur or what is and is not covered. So I'd want to understand that. I think another drawback to it right now is that it's denominated in dollars. So another, like before I would become a customer, I would want to understand what's the process to resolve this, right? If it takes 4 years or 10 years to resolve, Bitcoin might moon. And then I'm just like we see with like FTX and Mt. Gox, stuff like that. Even though you get all your money back in dollars, it's actually like, you know, a 10th or a 50th of what you should have. So I'd want to understand that too. But still, it's still like massive progress and a novelty to offer insurance for your funds. And it's also
something about,
I think
this,
it's
something about the architecture that is what enables Lloyd's of
London
to get comfortable.
I mean, it's beyond just like me looking at the architecture and saying it looks good. Like I think it speaks to the credibility of the architecture that you can actually get insurance coverage. Like people who probably don't know, people who are not hardcore Bitcoiners probably looked at this and they're just worried about, you know, like the actuarial science of it. And they should have people who understand Bitcoin in custody, but like that team apparently assessed it and said, this is such a solid solution that it's credible to provide insurance.
Yeah. So my initial take on all this, and I have tons of questions, and Rob, if you're in the chat, I'm sure you'll be able to answer even more of these, and I would love to learn more. I did look, you know, at Anchorwatch some years ago, and you know, thought it was a cool idea, but obviously it's very, very complex, and getting that sign off from Lloyd's of London, congrats! Like that's extremely impressive. So really cool to see, to your point, that people are innovating, and I do think an insurance policy by itself is a huge differentiating factor from anything out there in the market. So that alone is incredible. Having said that, I would take that with a giant grain of salt, to your point on the insurance. For a variety of reasons, I've had experience with insurance companies over the years, and to your point, you know, if it's denominated in dollars, I would be extremely cautious on that front, because to your point, it's very rare that an insurance company just pays out ever. And like, so there's always like trials and tribulations and potential legal proceedings and things like that. And so that is one of the big questions I always have is it possible to get that denominated in BTC? Now the answer is probably no, because even if you could get an insurance policy written in BTC, it'd be extremely difficult for someone to hold sufficient BTC. And
well, there is a thread on Hacker News about this, or sorry, on Stacker News about this.
Yeah.
And I think they were, you know, a lot of people are asking, can we get it in BTC instead of USD? And I think somebody chimed in, maybe it was Rob, who
Yeah.
kind of said that that's like in progress, but not like there right now. So
If
I
they
think it's
get
like
that,
everybody's aware that that's desired, but maybe nothing to
totally.
announce yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very skeptical. Just, and again, I'm not an expert, so like, please, I would love to be wrong, and perhaps Rob has more information. I'm sure he does, but I'm very skeptical that an insurance company would be able to underwrite that. And even if they did, unless they could, and maybe they could do this, like cryptographically prove, like we talked about with River last week, with proof of reserves, that they actually have enough BTC to make you whole. My default position would probably be that that they're going to try every trick in the book to kind of like delay the payment and then pay you out in USD when it's worth a lot less. I would love to be wrong on that. And even if that's the case, it's still a huge advancement over what we have today, which is absolutely nothing.
There must be some sort of hedging mechanism that an insurance company could provide if they know that customers would want Bitcoin instead of dollars. There's probably some hedging mechanism that could serve that need. It might have a slightly more bits of cost, but I don't believe it's like impossible to do.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, again, without being an expert on this, my guess is there are certainly sophisticated ways to do it, but at the end of the day, someone has to come up with the BTC, right? And so
Yep.
in a world where price just absolutely skyrockets while you're waiting for this, unless there's like a way to prove on chain somewhere, in your chain of hedging, someone actually holds the coins, I would still, again, as a novice, like I would love to be proven wrong on all this, but be skeptical. Again, having said all that, any kind of insurance is much better than nothing. As I've told, with Steve, I'm more comfortable with certain kinds of exchanges because even if I get paid out in USD, but let's say, like you said last time, DK, if MicroStrategy gets nationalized, at least getting paid out in USD is a lot better than nothing, right? So that's still a huge advancement.
Yeah, it is an interesting discussion about, is it realistic economically to support BTC denomination? Maybe a reason it would be is that the business model for Anchorwatch is to charge, I think their website says it starts at 55 basis points per annum. So it's a percentage of assets under management. So if Bitcoin price 10x is, you're paying them 10x more. And so, like in theory, that should cover BTC denomination. With I think the main risk being if that's, I guess I need to think more about like how often is that getting locked in? Like over what window of time is the insurance company getting sort of locked into that? Or I guess so like how often is the customer paying? That's a key question, right? The more frequently they pay, the less financial risk the insurance company is taking and Anchorwatch is taking. So maybe they pay like weekly or something, that would reduce the risk. And I think customers would be, well, I don't know, it's just a trade-off, like, right? I mean, the more frequently you pay, the less upside you have in your Bitcoin, but the less financial risk, and you should get a better price. Well, and I mean, as a customer, like if I'm like given the value proposition, okay, you can pay once a year, but it's denominated in dollars, or you can pay once a day or once a week or something, and it's denominated in Bitcoin. I guess I'd want to do some calculations, but I think I'd pick denominated in Bitcoin.
What is the option today? So it's 55 basis points paid once a year in USD.
I don't know the frequency of payment.
Okay, but do you know if it's paid in USD?
I also don't know that.
Okay,
all good questions. I wanted to point out a couple things. Rob, thanks, Rob. You sent some messages, and just to add to how I described it earlier. So I mentioned there's like 4 layers of time. And actually, Jesse says here, he calls it decaying multisig. I think that's a good way to think about it and frame it as well, decaying multisig. So layer 3, the first layer is, the customer has 2 of 3, Anchorwatch has 2 of 3. The second layer is the customer only needs 1 of 3, and Anchorwatch has 2 of 3. The third layer, which I did not describe previously, is if the customer loses all 3 of their keys. So they totally fucked up. They have no keys. They're still okay because now it's Anchorwatch and some other third party, some partner of theirs has a 2 of 3.
I thought in that case you have to wait the time. Is that not the time delayed stuff?
Yeah, each of these layers, the only layer that you don't have to wait is layer 1.
Yeah.
So layer one, there's no time delay, and that's where the customer must provide 2 of 3 signatures, and Anchorwatch must provide a separate set of 2 of 3 signatures. This layer 3 is like a 11-month delay or something. So
and then layer 2, if we can just back up to make sure I understand. Layer 2, I think you mentioned that there's a situation where the user may only have one key. Is that right?
Yeah, layer 2, which is, did he tell me how long that is? He didn't, but let's call it 6 months or something. Then the customer only needs one of their 3 keys.
But what is 1 of 3 in a multi-sig? Like, my understanding is it's 2 of 3 multi-sig from the end user and 2 of 3 multi-sig from Anchorwatch, and each of those have to be unified in a 2 of 2 multi-sig, right? So that's the overall what we're talking about. If the end user has 1 of 3, isn't that the same as having 0 of 3? Like, what can you do with that?
I don't understand the question. The difference between 1 of 3 and 0 of 3 is 1 of 3 requires you to have a signature, one signature. 0 of 3 means you have 0 signatures.
Oh, it's set up like the 2 of 2 is set up that each of the things only need 1 of 3?
Or is the one only after some time?
No. There's a 2 of 2, and then one of those 2 is the 2 of 3 from Anchorwatch, and the other one we're talking about layer 2. So after like 6 months or so, only needs 1 of 3 from the customer.
Right.
Oh,
so it's initially 2 of 3, and then it becomes 1 of 3. So there's not only decay in the value, but there's like decay in like number of signatures over time. That is a novel idea. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And for the technical, the audience that's technical, you might have heard of Miniscript before. And this product is using Miniscript, which the nerd in me likes, because Miniscript is really cool, but it's been fairly academic up to this point, not really deployed. And so I believe Anchorwatch is like the first real product to utilize Miniscript. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but maybe there's a few others. But in any case, they use Miniscript. So what is Miniscript? Bitcoin script can get really complicated to analyze, especially if you do something really novel and complex like Anchorwatch. So Miniscript is just a policy tool, which makes it much easier to understand this stuff. So the notation is something that any of us or anyone in the audience could understand if you saw it. You'd see that you have this 2 of 2, and then each of those 2 breaks down into 2 of 3s. And then it would also visually represent like 1 of 3. It would be understandable by most people. Whereas if you showed them the actual Bitcoin script that gets produced, it would be like very complicated. So Miniscript just makes it easier to avoid errors and mistakes when writing complicated scripts like this.
So two initial thoughts coming out of this. And again, I'm just starting to think about this. I'm sure we'll have many more ideas and questions. And by the way, Jesse, thank you for being in the chat. I heard you say you couldn't hear me. I tried turning up my mic a good bit. So if you could let me know if you hear me better, that'd be awesome. Thank you. Two initial thoughts. One is, I love the idea in principle, and it's really laudable that they figured out how to get insurance at all. My first question though comes up of like, I always am a little, careful of like, what are the second order consequences of this we don't see? As one example, my guess is the only way you can get an insurer to write off is if you say, we need to be able to find a way to get the Bitcoin, even if the person loses everything. And it's some X amount of time, a year, maybe it's many more years if you want to be more conservative, whatever. I do wonder though, like, and maybe this is too paranoid, but like, how does that start to change the game theory with humans, right? Like, for example, if someone's okay, this is a political opponent that we have that owns a tremendous amount of Bitcoin. That's like, okay, now they're in jail, and we know we only need to keep them in jail for 1 year. That sounds, I know, kind of extreme, but I'm starting to think as things go higher and higher, always it would make me a little bit uncomfortable always having that that backup option where the parties without you could collude. That's my first thought. And again, I'm not saying that you don't want that. In fact, Steve and DK know I've been in many ways the most sort of vocal in our group, at least, for just leaving on a reputable exchange like a River or a Block. But I do
Watch the
I don't know.
pitchforks come.
I know we'll talk a lot more about that. But the reason for that is because I think there's very different sets of risks. And this has always been one of my sort of like, I guess, concerns or issues with multi-sig is it just starts getting a lot more complex where, it's almost like, I almost kind of like, there's like the two extremes, the barbell curves, like self-custody, you either have it or you don't. A river or block, they either, get nationalized or lose, rug you or they don't. Those are two different sets of risk. Like, it's just so simple. I'm always just like, whenever I see too much complexity with any kind of multi-sig solution, I'm like, I don't know, man, this is like this kind of weird thing in the middle. And there's all these cases I haven't thought about. So I need to think a lot more about it. I think it's laudable they're doing it. I think it's really cool to see experimentation. But I'm always curious, like with anything like complexity, there's like probably a bunch of unknowns or like weird situations that this could incentivize. That's number one. Number two, independent of that setup that they have today, though, I love the idea of being able to buy insurance. And I wonder if there are other mechanisms that people are exploring. And if so, I would love to hear about this, where you could do insurance for your own cold storage or, perhaps see more clearly insurance for coins, or even potentially buy additional insurance for coins that you hold on an exchange or something like that. I don't know how you would do that. And perhaps there's ways of pooling risk, obviously Bitcoin being programmable money, I imagine there's new opportunities there, but I would be extremely interested in if there's a way to build Bitcoin native insurance for the old school, super simple self-custody or have coins on exchange.
I mean, part of that comes down to the question of what is insurance and what is the purpose of insurance. And I think a lot of people misunderstand insurance. So I don't know all of what is covered by the Lloyd's of London policy, but insurance is really designed to protect you from tail risk events. And if you're kind of just insuring yourself for your own setup, and then you have a foot gun, or you kind of shoot yourself in the foot and do something stupid, that's maybe not the kind of thing that insurance is designed for. Maybe insurance is designed for, like, an EMP hits and in your Bitcoin is knocked out that way. So, part of it is like, it would be nice to just be able to insure everything, but I think we really also have to think about, like, what is the purpose of insurance, and where can insurance be effectively applied to kind of shave off the tail risks, but not to solve all the kind of in between kind of normal distribution of risks that occur in kind of an asset like this.
But I mean, I agree with that. And for traditional insurance, and again, I'm obviously not an actuary, but I don't see why in principle you couldn't create insurance for anything, obviously with a price, right? And obviously that the price for some of that may be impossibly high. But just as one example, very simple example, but in Mexico, this was the case. And I think in India and a lot of other sort of developing countries, they have these situations where the savings that people do is every week, a group of whatever 5 to 10 friends come together and just put in their excess. Let's say they made $400, spent $300 on living, and they have an extra $100 left over. They all put $100 in a pot, and that goes to someone that week. And then the next week, you're the next person. And so it's a way to kind of like incentivize savings with social groups you trust. So I'm not saying that it's going to work exactly like that, but with that as sort of an inspiration, imagine you got in a group of, I don't know, people that you generally trust, or people that you have some, I don't know, reason to believe they're probably taking care of their stuff, but you entered in some kind of like a locked pool where if some event caused someone to lose that money, all of a sudden some portion of your pooled savings could go to them at a hyper local level, or maybe at a slightly higher level. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I do imagine there's a lot of new experiments you could run with programmable money like that.
Mm-hmm.
So a few more just additions and clarifications. Rob also let me know that so the layer 4, that's when you are completely self-sovereign. It's just a 2 of 3 wallet for yourself. Anchorwatch and their other partner is no longer involved, and that also means you don't have insurance anymore. So the insurance only applies when you have this more, these other backup options. So obviously, if you want to, continue using the service, then you keep paying, and it would reset all the timers. So that's how that works. He confirmed that right now they only support Ledger hardware wallets, because Ledger hardware wallets support Miniscript. I mentioned Miniscript earlier. Trezor does not support Miniscript, so that'll be a future improvement. It would definitely be. It's not only good because some people are going to like cold cards or Trezors more than Ledger, but even if you like Ledger, if you're doing multi-sig, you want vendor diversity when you have that option. And so
do you think the other vendors have any issue with Miniscript, or they just haven't gotten around to implementing it yet? Or
I strongly suspect I highly doubt it's ideological. It's almost certainly priority. Like there's been zero reason to support it.
Right.
I mean, I mean, Ledger takes a lot of flack, but like hats off to them that they even did Miniscript. They have a developer there who's a hardcore Bitcoiner and is pretty productive. So I think he probably single-handedly made that happen. But so credit to Ledger for supporting Miniscript, and hopefully others follow suit. I'm not aware of any like technical requirements that it would have that would make it difficult for other products. So I think it's just a matter of priority.
Mm-hmm. And presumably you can do it with things like Electrum or Sparrow or other kind of non-hardware wallets that are, do they generally support Miniscript yet or not?
Yeah, Bitcoin Core does. It's a good question. I don't know about the wallets you mentioned, but we should put that on our to-do list to research. I'd like to know that. We should also just talk about like the value proposition. So, I mean, I think the technical architecture is awesome. All the things I've talked about so far, I think are really cool, but like, is this a good, like, who's the customer? Who's actually going to use this?
Yeah.
I'll just share my own my initial reaction was like, that's a steep price tag. So, 55 basis points or more, that felt expensive to me. And I've always had an aversion to paying like a financial advisor 1% per year of total assets, because that just takes away tons of your own. It's a huge portion of your own profit margin.
Yeah.
After inflation and taxes, your returns on like normal like stocks and stuff like that and bonds like is not that much. So paying a financial advisor 1% or more basically takes away all your profits. So I've had an aversion to that. So any with Bitcoin, the natural aversion as well, especially when, like in theory, you can do it at no marginal cost. You spend like $150 on a hardware wallet, do it yourself, and you don't pay anything to anyone ever again. However, a couple differences are, one, we expect Bitcoin price appreciation to be much more than like stocks and bonds and things like that. And secondly, just the consequences if you mess up are so severe. And next week we're going to have, I mean, if you think this week we're talking about custody a lot, next week probably the whole episode will be about custody. We're going to talk
controversial.
We're going to talk about trade-offs between like using a third party, using a traditional hardware wallet with the seed phrase, using BitKey and different solutions like that. And I mean, the reality is, we'll debate it, and some of us have different opinions and views, but we can all agree that every solution has risks and trade-offs, and you can lose your Bitcoin, whether it be due to user error or thief or government or whatever, all these different attack vectors. You can lose it with any of these solutions. And so, I've come around to thinking like that price might not actually be that crazy. Actually, my understanding, first of all, ETFs have something like, Bitcoin ETFs have a
20 bips, right?
Something like 20, 30 bips. Right?
Yeah, so it's about half that, yeah.
And then my understanding with like Coinbase institutional custody, so like if you're a whale or high net worth or MicroStrategy or whatever, I think you're paying something like 15, 20, 25 bips to them. So it's not free to a lot of people already. So that's sort of the floor. So 55 is like obviously more than 25, but it's not compared to zero. And then the insurance is super novel. Just so I think there could be a pretty sizable segment of people who own a lot of Bitcoin. They do not have the time, patience, or skill set to do it yourself self-custody, like to get that price to zero, basically. They want to sleep well at night. They don't they don't want to completely trust a third party due to all the reasons, the risks with that. So I think this solution could be attractive, and it's also, that would be, I mean, it is targeting like high net, people with a lot of money, so it could be a good business.
To me, it seems like it would bake off against like an Unchained or a Casa. Are those likely the alternatives that somebody would be exploring when deciding on something like Anchorwatch?
At least.
I think so.
And maybe more because of the insurance.
But like, I don't know what Unchained's pricing is, and I don't even know. The last I looked at Casa, it was a while ago, but I think Casa, the 3 of 5, like the more premium package, something like $1,800 a year, something like that. Which everything's relative. Like a lot of people would say that's expensive, right? Well, 55 basis points if you have a lot of Bitcoin is really expensive, right? I mean, if you have $1 million of Bitcoin, that's $55,000 a year you're paying. And if Bitcoin goes up a lot, if that million turns into 5 million, then you're paying $250,000 a year. So, and it says starting at 55 basis points. So it might even
that's 5,500, right? 55 bips on $1 million is 5,500.
Did I do that wrong? 10,000. Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah, 5,500.
Okay.
So
thanks for correcting that.
Yeah. But still much more than
but more than
$1 million at 55 bips is
sorry about
more than double.
but it's more than
stands,
it's more. So Casa. I mean, and I think the minimum to use Anchorwatch is $250,000. So they're targeting people who have quite a bit of Bitcoin.
Do you think they would have the ability to? Well, I think a lot of times when you get kind of free custody, what you're really doing is you're paying for exchange and you're getting custody for free. So if you go on like a Coinbase or Cash App or River, I think for the most part, it's kind of like, here's the price of Bitcoin, right? And in the exchange and in the spread, they make their money, and then you kind of get custody for free indefinitely. And this seems like it sort of more appropriately aligns the long-term cost of custody with kind of the ongoing cost of custody with the pricing. But is there an opportunity for an Anchorwatch to say, have exchange services collect a little spread on that, and then actually offer like an insured custodied Bitcoin kind of for free? Do you think that's a useful framing, or is that just kind of like confusing?
That's indirectly how I've always thought about it, and we'll talk more about that with the exchanges, I'm sure, next week. I think you're getting. I think the value of custody you get from like a River or Block is a really, really good deal, even though they're making their money on the exchange. But my big question is, to me, the novelty in all of this, it just comes down to the insurance policy for me. So my big question is, do you know, Steve, for some of these high net worth clients that are using Coinbase, my understanding is in the past, they could only get the hot wallet custodied and not the cold wallet. Do you know, is that changing?
Insured? Do you mean?
Yeah, insured. Mm-hmm. Or is there a possibility to be able to potentially pay additional for insurance with an exchange? So again, I come back to, I get the beauty of the multi-sig, and it potentially comes back to you. But again, I'm skeptical of all the complexity. I personally would be interested in paying an additional fee if I thought that you could get insurance with Block holds it and Block takes out an insurance policy on it, and or if they already have that without me. Obviously, I understand that there's a different set of trade-offs, but that would be very interesting to me.
I'm not aware of that. I actually remain skeptical that could be insured. I mean, I agree with your theoretical point that anything's insurable, but I mean, I think it would become uneconomical.
Well, and so that's my other question then, even with Anchorwatch, because if you play this to the limits, it certainly works at first, right? But like, imagine for a minute if you have to start underwriting everything and you find a way to do it in BTC. Like, if just take this to the limits, you wanted 1-for-1 BTC in cold storage, and there's probably much more sophisticated ways to do it. But if you wanted that means you could only insure, I guess, 10.5 million Bitcoin or whatever's actually left out there, 9.9, 9.5 with 9.5 held for you in storage. So even at the limits, I'm skeptical insurance could work.
Well, I mean, it all comes down to what the model says the risk of losses, right? And I'd love to see what those models are, because I think it's really hard to put number to quantify that. So I'd really love to see how they model it out. But I do believe that the Anchorwatch solution has lower risk of loss than an exchange, even an exchange with a very elaborate system. So if that's true, then I mean, I guess it's my belief that, or I mean, they've proven that they're insurable. Is it sustainable? Which is a question you ask. We'll see. But like, I believe it could be true that they are insurable. It is sustainable, and that there's a very meaningful difference between the risk of loss of their solution versus an exchange, which would make an exchange not insurable. But I don't know. But that's sort of my gut instinct.
And just for clarification of understanding, because I'm still trying to digest all of what you described in the overall architecture. But when you talk about the layers, are the layers always talking about like additional time delay to get to the decreasing multi-sig dependency? Like layer 1 is you have all the pieces together and there's no time delay. Layer 2 is you have some of the pieces and there's a little time delay. Layer 3 is you have fewer of the pieces and there's more time delay. Is that what the layers are really just like different time components?
Yeah, maybe another way. I mean, I mentioned spending conditions earlier, so maybe I'll try to frame it that way again. But there's 4 different ways. So there's a wallet with some Bitcoin in it. There's 4 different ways to spend that Bitcoin. Some of them have more relaxed rules where you need less keys or different sets of keys. Different people can participate. And each of those 4 spending conditions have a time component as well. And so out of the gate, only one of the 4 can actually be used to spend because no time's elapsed. Did that answer or help clarify, or no?
Yeah, so I guess it's mostly about spending conditions, and time is one of the spending conditions.
Time is in every spending condition. It's an input to each spending condition.
Yeah.
I mean, and this isn't specific. I mean, every Bitcoin transaction has a time component. The default is immediately spendable.
Like now, yeah.
But I mean, there's literally, it's called n-lock time, is like a bit or a few bits of data in the transaction format that's in every Bitcoin transaction. So that's existed since Satoshi. There's since been additional types of time locks added to the protocol that are used in like Lightning and Arc and many other protocols.
So guys, I think we've gone for Anchorwatch and conditions for an hour, and I know we've got a lot on custody next week too. So given that we have a couple of other interesting topics, I'm curious if we could dive into some of the Nostr Season 3 stuff, but that's a long topic. I know we also have the explosion of various shitcoins going on. Where are you guys feeling you want to go? Or an audience?
Or reproducible builds as well. I discovered today Signal's not reproducible. That's always a good topic.
You discovered Signal's not reproducible?
Yeah.
That's what he said in the chat. I want to hear about this. So we should first frame this, because there's a recent question that came up as I was talking to somebody who's new to Bitcoin and kind of new to getting conviction about it. We're talking through a bunch of different custodian ideas and sort of, should you keep them on an exchange, on a hardware wallet, plus a lot of study, or Bitkey. And I was sort of advocating that I think Bitkey is actually a really nice set of trade-offs. Now, I haven't used Bitkey myself, but we've discussed it a lot. I think I generally understand the details to some extent. And one of his questions, which I think gets to the reproducible builds question, was he said, well, how do I know that there's not going to be any malware or other kind of code inserted into the iOS app that I download? How do I know that that's not malicious? And I said, I don't really know how you could prove that. And I think that touches on the reproducible builds issue, because when it goes through the App Store, is sort of a disconnect between when you actually, the open source code may be open source and developed and compiled, submitted to Apple, and then it's kind of like a black box, and it comes out the other side of the App Store that you download. and like, what can you do with that binary? So Steve, is that itself a reproducible build issue, and is that sort of the kinds of things we should be thinking about with Signal and others, or is that kind of a adjacent?
Yeah, I mean, let's just start by like, what is reproducible builds? Like, I'd never heard of it before I got in Bitcoin. I've been in tech forever, but I'd never heard of reproducible builds. And even as a concept, I think it's relatively like the past 10, 15 years. Actually, my understanding is that the first project and effort to even create a reproducible build was using Gideon and on Bitcoin Core project. So hopefully that's history is correct. So what is it and why does it matter for people? It just means that, typically the software we all use, a developer writes the code, compiles the code, and when they compile it, that's called building the code, and it creates a binary which you can install on your laptop or your phone. People are familiar with that. So that, I think most people know what building software means. Reproducible build means that anyone else in the world could independently build that software. And it implies that the software is open source or that it's at least source available. And then, so in the case of like a Bitcoin wallet, maybe David is the author, he codes it, it's on GitHub or whatever, I can then build it. And the key thing is I don't not only just build it and have a binary that works, but my binary actually matches the binary that David has on his website or the app store that I'm installing it from, and they have to match. And if they do, then we know that the binary that everyone's using actually matches the source code that the author is saying is in the binary. That alone doesn't mean that it's safe or bug-free. You still have to look at the code and audit it and make sure there's not any malicious code or backdoors or problems or bugs. You still have that step, which is really hard to do. But if you don't have reproducible builds, then nothing else matters, because if you don't have a reproducible build, you can have a perfect audit. So you know that the code you're looking at is perfect, let's say.
Like you audit the open source code on GitHub and you say, yes, this is the code I want to be running.
But you're still screwed because the code you're actually running, the binary you install through some app store or download from a website actually wasn't built from that source code. So it turns out reproducible builds are incredibly important, essential for anything that's critical, such as a wallet that's holding your cryptocurrency. Another type of application where it's really important is in communications. A product like Signal, which is positioned as private communication, end-to-end encryption, so that that you actually get privacy. Just like if you're talking to someone in person, now you can talk to them digitally around the world and do it privately without others spying on it. That all falls apart though if the Signal software is not supporting reproducible builds, because again, you can go look at the source code and maybe it all pans out, but if you don't know that that's the binary you're running, you don't have that assurance. And I learned today that since I think it was like March or April of last year, there was a GitHub issue created saying that Signal is no longer supporting reproducible build, and I looked through the comments and I didn't see a lot of urgency. Definitely didn't see urgency, and I didn't even really see enthusiasm for the developers to fix it. It kind of I didn't read every post, but like kind of I got the sentiment is kind of like, we'll do our best. Whereas I feel it's like a lot of work, incredibly important.
I agree around the importance, and just to kind of clarify why it's important. I could imagine that there's a GitHub repo that's out there. You look at it, you audit the code, you say, this is great. And then you get a different thing through the app store that's a binary that wasn't actually built from that code. And in between there could be some backdoor inserted to let CIA or whoever, have access to the communication, right? So that's like the reason that the reproducible build, just like to be very kind of tactical about it. So what is required of the developer to support such a thing in an ongoing way is just take the code, compile it to a binary, and provide some sort of a checksum that people on the other side of the app store can compare and kind of run the same checksum, or is there a lot more type of work required to do that?
It does. Well, it does. It turns out it's really hard for a developer to create a build that is reproducible and keep it that way. So it's not as easy as it might sound. And one of the reasons is a lot of software has third-party dependencies. You use other libraries, right? And the more dependencies you use, the less control you have. So if a dependency you use, if it's not reproducible, then you can't have a reproducible build yourself. And just, and you might even achieve reproducible status like Signal apparently had, and then and lose it just due to software changes. Maybe you add a new feature, you add a new dependency, or you just change your own build system, and it happens to create that situation. So it is difficult to achieve. So and I've seen this with Bitcoin wallets. There's several wallets. The developers behind the wallet definitely care about reproducible builds, but they don't support it. And it's not because they don't care. It's because, like, in some situations, they depend on a third-party library that isn't reproducible. So
one question and then one thought moving forward on this question is, if you can't get a reproducible build, are they at least signing with their pub key all of the software that they're releasing? They're signing with their private key, rather?
I don't know, but it does. I mean, that still doesn't address the issue.
Would it not address?
They can sign a binary that you download, but if you don't know that the binary you downloaded, with what code was used to produce it, then it doesn't matter. A backdoor could still be added.
So I want to make sure I understand this then. If they have all the code for an app, and then they package that and sign it with a private key, is the issue because you're getting it through an app store? Because I'm assuming as long as it's all open source and I know everything in this package was signed with this private key, even if I can't reproduce it, in theory, if there's enough eyeballs on it, someone could find the backdoor.
But if it was signed by the private key, all that means is it came from me. Doesn't mean it was the build that I claim it to be.
But my point on that is that because I have to install it through an app store? Like if I downloaded the binaries myself that you signed?
No.
Let's imagine that the developer themselves was malicious. They could say, look, I'm going to install a backdoor, and then I'm going to give you a binary that has a backdoor in it, and I'm going to sign it with my private key so you know it came from me. And it did, in fact, come from me, but it has something inserted that I put into it.
But I guess what I'm saying on that is, if there's enough eyeballs on the open source code that's signed, even if you can't reproduce it, in theory, it's enough eyeballs makes any problem shallow, right? Any bug?
No, because I'll take it. I think a more likely scenario than the evil developer. So even if you fully trust the developer and they are trustworthy, they are not evil. Mm-hmm. What is more likely is their development machine's been hacked. Mm-hmm. And so the hacker inserts code into that developer's build that the developer's not even aware of. So they build their binary using the software they coded and they think is correct and fine. But the third-party hackers inserted malicious code, some backdoor, that the developer is unaware of. They build the binary, they sign it, and then we all download it. We see that it's signed by them. We trust them. They didn't do anything wrong, but we all have malware now.
And to be clear, you're saying this could happen between all of the code that they published online, which has been reviewed by whatever, let's say hundreds of qualified people, and when it gets built.
Again, that doesn't matter. Like, it could be, everyone could, the software they've written could literally be perfect. Everyone in the world could review it and agree.
Yeah.
And there can still be a third-party hacker insert a backdoor. And if you don't support reproducible builds, you have no idea. And even the developer themselves don't know that's happened.
Interesting.
And then even, if like I'm the evil hacker, I might not even target that wallet developer, especially if that wallet's written in like JavaScript or something, which is notorious for having tons of dependencies. I'll go target some other library that has nothing to do with cryptocurrency, and it has a group of developers who are not hypersensitive to security, because it's like a logging library or just something like super basic. And I would insert malicious code in that, which I know will ultimately get me what I want in that wallet. And then again, like, so here's a situation where the wallet developer, they didn't even have their computer hacked. They didn't do anything wrong themselves. They wrote all perfect code. Their computer's not hacked. They're doing a build, but it pulls in a third-party library that has malicious code and will ultimately steal from all their users. And then we're talking about Signal. I mean, all of this can be true for Signal as well.
Wow.
So reproducible build is this thing that like almost no one knows about. It's super hard to do as a developer, but it's absolutely essential and critical. And it's also it's necessary but insufficient, because you need to have it, and you still need a bunch of people reviewing the code that was used to build.
Is the main challenge the dependencies? You've mentioned the dependencies a bunch. Is that the main reason that any given developer can't have sort of sovereignty over the reproducibilities because of the dependencies?
I think even if you have no dependencies, it's still relatively hard to do reproducible builds. It's not impossible. It's one of the, like, anything to do with like make systems and build systems and package systems is always a pain in the ass, right? I mean, like it's been a long time since I coded, but even today, I just watch developers today and they still like, it's just like unsexy work to get build systems to work in general. And because there's so many little finicky things about a build, there's just like a million things that can go wrong to make it reproducible. So I think even with no dependencies, it's hard. Dependencies make it even harder.
The crazy thing to me is that in the case of Signal, obviously, like, they know how important it is, A, just like philosophically, but B, if they were already doing it. And so there was no kind of like written explanation from the company or any of the engineers about why they stopped.
I mean, I've literally spent 2 minutes of my life on this, so it's not fair to me to like criticize the company, the organization,
Sure.
or their processes. All I know is I was told today that it's not reproducible anymore. I looked at the GitHub issue. I read the comments. So
yeah, I mean, it seems like
I don't know how their company. I would expect more urgency from the developers of that project, though.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like potentially a breaking news if that is the case, or like if there's no reason behind it.
Well, you'd think, but even in our Bitcoin world, I would expect most Bitcoiners have never even heard of reproducible builds, and most wallets are not reproducible. So you can go to walletscrutiny.com. It's a project that Spiral funds, and they have reviewed thousands of cryptocurrency wallets, and like something like a few dozen are reproducible. Like most are not reproducible.
Yeah. And
then actually this all got started. I mean, David brought up iOS, and even if you do everything right, you prioritize it, you do all the work, and it's still not within your control as a wallet developer on iPhone, because iOS doesn't support reproducible builds, because as a developer, you give your binary to Apple, and then Apple modifies it.
Right.
When it puts in the App Store, and that's all opaque. That's not an open process. So the best you can do on iOS is that as a developer, you can make your source code available. You can ensure that it's reproducible on your end. Then an independent party can jailbreak their iPhone and do a reproducible build, show that it matches the binary that the developer provided, install that binary on the phone and see that it works. You at least then eliminate the risk that the developer did something nefarious. Then you've narrowed it to like Apple or their process is the risk factor then, which is an important step. That's better than nothing, but that's sort of where we're at. With Android, you can support reproducible builds. So you can go to walletscrutiny.com and type in your favorite Bitcoin wallet and see what their rating is.
You know, this is all just making me think, as my awesome Albie hat here, shout out to these guys, says, you know, open source everything, but not only open source everything, but in the future, you know, when we do move to having potentially all of our identity being a pub key via Nostr or something else like that, I mean, you not only want now everything open source, but at least all of the critical infrastructure for your money and your communication, or like any major things you're doing with your identity, I mean, that should be reproducible as well. And so one of the thoughts that first comes to mind is a project that has been working on Nostr for some time, Zap.store. I think they just changed it to zapstore.dev. Obviously, they have a huge uphill battle in what they're doing, but this is, one of the first, I guess, open stores where you can bring your own identity, see things that are cryptographically signed, at least the releases. I don't know if they have anything supporting the reproducible builds yet, but that makes me very bearish on any closed system, even in Apple in the long run. And like the need for something like an open source phone that could run something like Zap.store, where you could also do reproducible builds. That seems like that's going to become not just critical for your money, but for everything once that becomes your identity.
Yeah, I agree with that. So the audience that maybe just first heard of reproducible builds might be thinking, this sounds super nerdy, super like no one's going to even understand this or deal with it. So, but I mean, my vision for how this could all work out, I think, open source, like Max just said, is crucial. Reproducible builds are crucial. We have to have those building blocks. We have to have like security audits and developers reviewing the source code. That needs to be done in every single software release. So at least with critical things like a Bitcoin wallet, the ideal world is a developers release the source code, say like, here's going to be our new release, here's the code, and then give a window of time before the binary is made available in app stores, like say 1 week or 2 weeks. And that gives security researchers and code reviewers a window of time to review that and give their stamp of approval. It also gives independent parties like a wallet scrutiny or whomever opportunity to reproduce the build and give their stamp of approval. And then that branding, whatever those stamps of approval are, can show up in app stores and wherever the touch points are for normal human beings installing this. They would look for like the thumbs up or the brand logo that tells them it's safe. So as a normal person, you just look for something like that that's safe. Obviously, there needs to be diverse and independent sources feeding into that, and even just showing that icon or whatever needs to be secure. But that's what makes it like robust and available, accessible to everyone.
Yeah,
but we're a long ways from that.
Do you think there are near-term? I mean, I think the Apple App Store and wrapping stuff is going to probably take a long time before that changes. Like it needs some real pressure to evolve. But do you think there are opportunities in the near term to like the way PWAs and kind of web apps have become more app-like over time? Do you think that would it be credible to say you could do some sort of a web-based reproducible build of a Signal-like experience that's driven off of a website that is a reproducible build?
Couple aspects of that. One, most web apps are written in TypeScript or JavaScript, which is really just adds even more complexity and difficulty and security. First of all, the language is a bit questionable from a security standpoint, and then the dependencies we mentioned. But let's focus on another point, which is any application that's running on the server is a whole nother dimension of complexity. Because if you just take a standard application that's running on a server, that code can be open source, but how does an independent party, how does a user know that the code running on that server matches the code that you have available? Even if that code has a reproducible build, like let's say I'm the user, I have the code, I do a build, it matches the binary that this company is telling me that they're running, but how do I know they're running that binary, right? So it's really hard, but the good news is through things like HSMs, hardware security modules, and this new trend of confidential computing, there is a trend towards being able to support this, where the binary could be running in an HSM and actually cryptographically attest to like this is the version of the binary being run, so that you as an outside party, as a user, could actually know that they are running that binary that they're saying that they're running. So as long as they make the code available and supports reproducible builds, just like on a phone or laptop or a computer that you have in your physical possession, you should be able to get strong guarantees that it is the code you're expecting. So I think that's just, I think we're going to see more and more of that, and that's going to be better for security and for users.
Awesome. Guys, I don't think we're going to have enough time to do all the Nostr stuff, so I'll do that for a future episode, but I do want to make sure we cover one story because I have major shout out. I think we're all going to love this, which is Stacker News went non-custodial. And I just posted that in the chat. Have you guys, I don't know, I can also give a little bit of background, but have you played with some of the non-custodial features yet?
I haven't.
Okay.
You're gonna have to tell us. Credits,
so let me do a bit of background. I think it's important to cover this one because shout out to Kian, that man's always pushing the limits, and so I just want to make sure he gets his flowers. This has not been an easy thing, but number two, given how much we've talked about the Lightning Network and payments, I think it's extremely important to understand, what are the barriers that payment providers face today, and is Kian's solution workable? Is it something that can solve those barriers? So to give a bit of context. Stacker News, for those who haven't played with it, stacker.news, I think it has been for years, but in my mind is the absolute premium go-to website to show a noob that Lightning Network is real. If you just want to, Steve and I had a friend, I guess, drop by the office the other day, and my quick way to show him Lightning Network is real was just log into Stacker News, watch, I did a zap. It's like Reddit or Hacker News, but you have Vote with Bitcoin. People can see instant, Lightning payments, and that's also interesting not just for the payment piece, but because Kian can use that to derive value signal to ranking the information, all kinds of sophisticated things happening under the hood there. So it looks like a very simple website, and it is, but there's a lot of sophisticated stuff happening under the hood with the payments, with the algorithms, and the ranking, right? So about a year ago, in fact, I remember it would have been a year ago in December, Kian launched Territories, which it's like subreddits. Anyone can manage it. You have the opportunity to earn money from hosting Territories. And I thought that was so exciting. I was like, all right, this is going to be the year of Territories. We're going to watch Stacker News absolutely 10x in growth. It's going to be fucking phenomenal. And instead, Kian, bless his developer heart, did not work much on Territories this year because he spent the whole year, he and EK, his other superstar developer, working on making Stacker News non-custodial. And Kian's one of the best developers I've ever met. And the fact that it took this long for him just shows the complexity of the kinds of problems that we're working with. But the reason he went non-custodial, as many of you guys will remember, is around that same time, I guess would have been early last year, January, February, you started to see, I guess, the concerns around legal actions for custodial actors. Are they money transmitters? Are they not in the United States? By the way, this obviously was under a different administration. Things could change, in a couple of days here. But regardless, even if it does change short term, it could change back 4 years from now, or the current administration could completely 180 on their position tomorrow. So this is a credible threat, even under a different political regime. But essentially, you saw a lot of wallets basically freaking out about if they're going to get tagged as money transmitters and don't have the necessary licenses. By the way, as a side note on that, it's incredibly arduous, expensive, and tiresome to get the necessary money transmission licenses you need, like state by state in the United States. So that's like its own separate conversation. And so you saw wallets like Phoenix and others withdrawing. I think that was January or February last year from the United States, because even though they're non-custodial, the way they route payments technically could be viewed as custodian. Anyways, all of this to say, I remember Kian's response was, essentially his strength as a developer. He didn't want to go through all the legalese and pay millions of dollars for licenses and, do business development or whatever, or regulatory development. Instead, he set out to understand if he could transmute a legal challenge into a technical one, and he did. And that was really cool. He actually used those exact words. I love that, the sort of alchemical description of transmuting a legal into a technical problem. Anyway, so long story short, what does that actually mean? Well, as of today, when you use Stacker News, there are two modes in which you can use it. Mode number one is you can attach your own wallets for sending or receiving. And this has been really cool to see. I think there's like, maybe half a dozen, maybe a few more different connection options today. I personally, and I think most people are probably using Nostr Wallet Connect, which is another huge topic, but Nostr Wallet Connect I'm seeing become the payment standard for Lightning payments pretty quickly. And Alby, shout out to those guys. They created it, and now a lot of other companies and projects are adopting it. But essentially, it uses Nostr relays to pass around payment intent and invoices essentially. And so you can now connect a wallet like Alby. I run mine custodially. I pay them, I think, $6 or $7 a month to run it in the cloud for me, all built on top of LDK, which is obviously really cool and exciting to see. Some people are running it themselves. But then I basically hook up that wallet to Stacker News using a Nostr Wallet connection string. It's pretty easy to do. And then for withdrawal, you can use that same Nostr Wallet Connect wallet, or you can use something as simple as Lightning address. Other people are playing with, custodial options. Sadly, those have been shutting down one by one. I think CoinOS is the major one that's still, potentially taking some of that risk today. And I think it's the number one wallet people are using on Stacker News as a result, because it's NWC Nostr Wallet Connect enabled, but also super easy to set up. So that's great. So, some subset of users, and it's growing over time, have all of their own wallets connected. And I have to say, it is an extremely satisfying feeling to sit there and zap another user on Stacker News. And especially if they have an Alby hub set up and I have an Alby hub set up, and to say, I just non-custodially finally settled, 21 sats or 100 sats or whatever it was right then, right there. Kian never touched it. And yet Kian could use the data to be able to rank the information. Man, it is so satisfying. It is the future, and it's so cool. If you're not using your own wallets yet, he created essentially a internal currency called Cowboy credits. And I know your first thought, it's like, oh, Kian turned shitcoiner. But fear not, this is actually Darth Coin approved. For those of you who don't know, Darth Coin is probably the least allowing Bitcoin maximalist I've ever met. He loves Cowboy credits, which is kind of amusing in and of itself. But Cowboy credits, essentially, it's like an in-game currency. There's a lot of legal precedent around this, but you can basically zap back and forth. Cowboy credits, which, are only to be used on Stacker News. And they're, in theory, supposed to be one Cowboy credit to one Satoshi, and then you could potentially trade those and come off the network. What's really cool, though, is you're starting to see people that do have the non-custodial setups start to basically market make and create markets for Cowboy credits for Satoshis in real time on Stacker News, and it's all happening there. So it's emerging from just being a sort of talking platform into a bit of a marketplace as well, where Kian never touches anything. And I don't know, it's just incredibly cool, incredibly exciting to see. It definitely took a long time, so I'm excited to see Kian be able to focus on other things now. But yeah, I just want to give that dude his flowers. If you haven't tried it, it's sick.
And let me make sure I understand. So the traditional way to use Stacker News has always been custodial, meaning you deposit Bitcoin via Lightning payment into your account there, and then you can zap people and pay them, and you can always take that out. And it was always sort of managed, and all of that Bitcoin that was in Stacker News was literally like in Stacker News, right? Managed by Kian. And with the change now, you can attach an external wallet. So we're calling it non-custodial, but it could be a custodial wallet, a non-custodial wallet, any kind of wallet, but it means it's not being custodied by Stacker News. It's being custodied by whatever the user wants, which could be non-custodial, custodial. And if the user hasn't transitioned to that, are the old sats now Cowboy credits until you transition, or how does that work?
I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kian or EK, or if anyone's listening to this, but they're honoring all of the old sats up until a certain date. So if you still want to withdraw those, you can just get your sats, and then from January 3rd on, no more.
So then if I have a custodial, like I'm still using the custodial version where Stacker News manages all of my sats, and you've attached a Nostr Wallet Connect third-party wallet, and how do we then interact? Can you pay me, or can I pay you? Or
so what's interesting is so there's three use cases: custodial to custodial. There we're just zapping Cowboy credits back and forth. In the case of non-custodial, it's sats to sats. In the case of I have sats, and you have so if you're zapping me and you're still custodial, then you're zapping me Cowboy credits and I receive Cowboy credits. If I'm zapping you sats, then I'm not sure how that conversion works. If he converts it to Cowboy credits, or if you just get sats and you still withdraw them. I'm not sure on that one. But in the case where you're zapping me Cowboy credits, then what I would need to do is, and he may have something slightly more sophisticated with reward sats that handles the case where you're zapping these, or I'm zapping you sats. But in the case of Cowboy credits, if I receive Cowboy credits and I don't want Cowboy credits, then I have to find basically someone to buy my Cowboy credits. And that's what you're seeing. And I think it's in Agora right now, is you're seeing these real-time markets pop up.
And you can trade when people are market making, are they taking on then risk
Correct.
of KYC AML type risk.
So it's,
But
yeah,
at least that's not on the platform, that's at the user level.
correct.
Cool. Big innovation.
Yeah, it's exciting.
One thing I'd say that, or Max, we feel your enthusiasm here. But it seems to me like for the end user, the self-custody aspect actually isn't really improving their experience. It's
worse.
Yeah, it's more, and obviously I say this is like an enormous, I said it earlier in the show, it's like essential to Bitcoin's long-term success. I personally work on self-custody a lot. I think it's really important. But you still have to look at it fairly and like,
Yep.
what is the value proposition to the user? And in this case, I think it's relatively weak. But the same, so one insight I had a few years ago is that I think the motivating driver for self-custody is not, there'll still be some end users that want it, but it'll mainly be from service providers, because service providers will want to provide their service globally and not, and they want to de-risk themselves and avoid a lot of regulatory costs.
Yes.
So they'll only provide their service in a self-custody fashion. So the end user, your value proposition is like, well, do you like the service or not? I mean, if you like the service, you have to, you have to bring, David said before, like bring your own custody solution. I think that's a good way to think about it. But I think that's what's going to drive self-custody for payment solutions, as opposed to like the end user is like, I think a lot of people, so there's definitely a segment of people who have to worry about censorship, but there's a lot of people who don't have to worry about censorship. So what's the value proposition for them with self-custody? And I think it's availability of services that they want to use.
I could not agree more. And, I think this is the first great example of that, where if you want to use Stacker News, regardless of any of your philosophy, you want to use Stacker News because it's awesome. You enjoy participating in the community, and you can make sats there. And it's like, you have an option. You either figure out, bring your own custody, which, sadly, most of those that have relied on, providing custody for the users have all shut down. I mean, Jesse made the great point. Zebedee now has the money transmission license that they need. And I think companies like them and Strike, that'll kind of be their advantages. They're easier to use for now. Although again, it's all like very murky because these things can change on a dime. But for people that do, want to figure out self-custody or whatever right now, the advantage is because I want to use Stacker News. I want to get sats. I don't want Cowboy credits. Like, what am I going to do with the Cowboy credit? I'm using Stacker News because I want it to be interoperable with the rest of my life. And so I think this is a great first example of, even though I'm deep in this world, I was very skeptical in self-custody for payments as well. Cause it's like, whatever, it's like you have a $20 wallet. And again, I get that that's first world, but like for most of us that live here, I mean, you lose it. I don't really care. Why would I put in all this time and effort to do that? But I did put in all this time and effort to do that and connect to Stacker News because I want to use Stacker News and I want to get sats. I don't want Cowboy credits. And I will say that, and I'm curious y'all's thought on this. This is the first time with Alby Hub that it's been just so easy for me to get started with self-custody. I haven't played much with Phoenix, so I understand that's pretty easy as well. But at least using it seamlessly on the web for something like zapping. I don't think Phoenix has NWC yet, so I don't think that would be a good option here for Stacker News yet. But with Nostr Wallet Connect, it's so easy to connect it. And now I can pay Alby $7 a month. They run in the cloud. It's awesome. The issue there is most users won't see the value of paying to run a wallet in the cloud if they haven't already played with it and seen, oh my God, this is incredible, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's a huge sort of business model challenge for them to figure out how to monetize it. But the tech is there and it's sick.
Yeah. And I would plus one on what Steve was saying is I think it's less of a user thing and it's more, can you unlock a lot of innovation because you now don't require people to get into all the details of how to manage wallets and custodianship and MTLs or not and KYC. I think just by kind of outsourcing that problem to like whoever wants to use it, you actually let people focus on the unique kind of value they're adding and building to the world, which is, I mean, effectively it's the same reason payments took off on the web is when Stripe said, look, you don't have to apply for your own merchant account, drop in our API, 7 lines of code, and now you can accept payments. That let all kinds of people build all kinds of experiences that accept payments, but don't worry about payments. And effectively, this is probably going to be able to do a similar type of thing. You want to build a subreddit like a Stacker News, you can do that. I just actually on Stacker News, I found this thing. I think I listed in our chat, the LN Roulette. Have you played with lnroulette.space?
I saw it.
Yeah, I played with it. It's very cool. But like, it'd be nice if you could run such a service like that, where they just focus on like the game they want to build, and they don't focus on all of the like, managing the money side of it, which they, unfortunately they have to do today, given the way they've set it up. But anyway, so yeah,
And that, by the way, DK, that's a great example of why would someone set up non-custodial themselves. I do agree that for companies like a River, Strike, Zebedee, whatever, that get all of the licenses, cool. That's their lunch. They can eat that. Kian can eat, the actual information.
Yeah.
However, I do see a huge opportunity for for many more people to have their own non-custodial nodes, like Albi Hub. And it's going to be, for what you guys discussed last week, just the same. It's going to be the same internet story all over again. If you want to play LN Roulette and River and Strike and Zebedee say, sorry, gambling not allowed, and you say, well, I want to play LN Roulette, and then that's when you get something like your Albi Hub or whatever. That's my guess.
Yeah. I was doing Steve told me to do my research on adult and gambling for this week, so I I did my research by playing LN Roulette.
I'm scared to ask what next week.
Yeah, I was about to say. any other research, DK?
More self-custody discussion. Okay, well, we're over time already, so we should wrap. We've successfully rugged the audience again by claiming that we were going to talk about the strategic Bitcoin reserve. That was really just fake news and clickbait. We had no intention of talking about that. and Thorchain as well is another rug. So enjoy your rugs. Keep it all in self-custody. Any last points to make, gentlemen?
Yeah, any stable coin that's algorithmic, run.
All right. Max says bye, Rune. All right. See you guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Strong ending.